The story evolves around Albert in the First World War. He was my dad. He was in the North Staffordshire Regiment. He served, as many did, in France. He didn't relate his experiences in the army, but I have some records of postcards that were written by him at the beginning of the war. Some of them went to his family. My husband's father too served in the First World War. He was in a Scottish regiment, but I know little of that, other that he did full service there. Second World War, yes, obviously. I was there as the war was declared. I was at the senior school and can relate all the way through those wars. The first years were that we went to school, but we were only there half days because there wasn't sufficient shelters to take the full school, and so it was divided. We had Anderson shelters, and Dad erected it in the back garden and fixed permanent bunks in the back garden. And the moment the sirens went, we had to get up out of bed and to go out and sleep in these bunks. There were some bombs fairly locally. My husband then, Morris Chadwick, he was called up, but when he was 20, and he went to Ireland. It wasn't long before he was overseas, and he went to Haifa in Israel. He served quite all his years there. He was a motor mechanic, so he worked on the convoys that went from Haifa to Cairo, carrying all the equipment and the troops that were required in the later years of the war. Of course, when war was over, that was
yes.
a really big rejoicing. Had street parties. Ours was only in a mild way, but I do recollect having this street party in Wilson Street. A very joyous, happy time. We did go to church every Sunday morning. God was with us all the way. Undoubtedly, God was there for us. Our faith was strong. He never left us. And he saw us through, undoubtedly.
Brilliant.
I've lived in Sneyd Green all my life. I was born on the farm in Noblet Road, which is now. My name was Dorothy Noblet. I remember the war vaguely, but fortunately we were not like a lot of people short of things. My father didn't go to war, or my brother, because of farming. I can remember having points for sweets, and I can remember we did have eggs because my mum had hens, but I can remember we had dried eggs in a tin, and they made lovely scrambled eggs. I think most people probably remember those. A lot of people had an air raid shelter in the garden, or some even in the houses, I do believe. But we, living in a farmhouse, we had a big cellar with sort of palliasse things to lie on and tins of goodies. I can remember a big tin that had crisps in. I can remember that very, very vividly. And I can also remember I used to go to Sneyd Street School, and I can remember walking to school, got to the Sneyd Arms, and there was a siren on top of the Sneyd Arms. The siren went off, and I wouldn't be very old. And I thought, do I run home or go to school? And I'm going home, and I ran all the way. I can remember that. We had a very good friend who died last year, actually. He was a prisoner of war in the Second World War. He was in Japan for 2 years, lived on rice for 2 years. But I don't think it did any harm because he was over 90 when he died. Yeah.
So during the war years, I was 8 years old, and I remember quite a lot of things. And I think on a child's mind at that age is food, you know, which is very important, you know, to have food and then suddenly have a very shortage of food was predominant in everybody's. Everything was rationed, you know, where we take things for granted today. But my mother was very adaptable. You know, she made small things go a long way, which most mums did, I think, that way. And during these war years, my father had to work away from home, and I got a young baby sister that was about 1. So it was a very dark time in our lives, with lots of children. The windows were all taped up so that no glass would fly when the bombs, the aluminium works were down near where we lived. So it was quite a dangerous place to live, really. The nights were dark because we had to have special curtains up, blackout curtains, so no lights would shine. And if the sirens during the war went off, we had to go in an air raid shelter that was in the street. We went to stay with my auntie for a few weekends because my uncle had to go to war. Their children were younger than us, and sometimes we had to go in their air raid shelter, which was underground. It was very cosy, I will admit, you know, but we used to hear the bombs dropping with the aluminium works there, and Crewe wasn't that far away, really. You know, you could hear the drones, and when the sirens went off, you just, whether it was night time or whatever, we were in school during the day, so that was a different thing. Everybody went into the shelters if it happened during the school time. I remember particularly when one of my friends, school friends, her brothers were in the Air Force, and they got a sister that was in the Wrens. They were older than us. But one day we had sad news that the eldest son had been killed. And I always remember as children all gathering round Muriel's home, you know, and it was a sad time because in those days everybody knew everybody, you know. If there was sad news, everybody, you know, was sort of mourning along with them. We heard news that I had an uncle, my mother's brother. He was in the parachute regiment, and he was captured, and in the Japanese went to war camps there, and he was very ill after the war when he came home. They'd gone through such terrible times, you know. We always realised, with my dad not being at home, you know, that we were in God's care. We always took my sister to Sunday school. But I always knew that, you know, God would look after us. I knew God would look after my father, which he did.
I can remember the war quite clearly. I was about 12. Sweets were rationed, bread was rationed. You never had oranges or bananas, nothing like that. It was really, really rough, but we coped all right. You kind of got used to it, you know. My father was a very big eater.
Okay.
Well, we couldn't afford bacon every day, but you couldn't get it anyway. So my mother used to fry my dad potatoes. So he had fried potatoes for his breakfast to fill him up. On one occasion, I was going to a wedding and I wanted a suit. Well, things were rationed and you had clothing coupons. Well, my father got extra clothing coupons because he worked on a factory and they had extra coupons because of the overalls. So I went to my dad and I said, will you let me have some coupons because I'm going to this wedding and I want a suit? Definitely not. That's the idea of rationing. You all have the same. So, a friend that I worked with in the office, we went on this bus, and I can't remember exactly where it was we were going, but she took her niece with her who was 6, and they called it the black market because you had clothes without coupons, which wasn't legal really. So we're sitting on the bus going along, and this Christine said, "Auntie Gertie, are you at the black market yet?" I could have hit her. My brother was 20 and he was in the Home Guard, and they went on an exercise for the weekend, and they were coming back, and this place was called the Limekill, and it's near to Bucknell, and they were coming back up, it's quite a bank, and something happened which doesn't happen 1 in a million. The chain snapped on his bike, threw him over the handlebars, split his helmet, and his face went blue, and he died a couple of days after. He was only 20. And I was 16, so that was very, very sad. My mum was never the same after. I've always gone to church, and I used to go before I went to the office. We used to have a service at 6:30 in the morning. I lived at Trent Vale. And I used to go, yeah, I've always had my faith, and I do believe in prayer so very much. I really do, I always have done.